Welcome back everyone, I'm Robin from This Blog's Meat, and let's look at some DUNDER samples under the microscope today. Hello again, this is future Robin. I'm editing the video currently, and I realized as I was going through and talking about these DUNDER samples that I got, they were actually in fact more closely related to muck. So even though I'm calling them DUNDER samples, keep in mind there is a difference between DUNDER and muck, and a lot of people, including myself right now, are using these terms interchangeably. And if you've watched any of my past videos about DUNDER and muck, you've heard the differences, but just in case you haven't, DUNDER is another word for essentially the stillage, the liquid that's left over in the still after distillation. And because we're talking about rum here and DUNDER is a rum thing, it's usually molasses based. Muck, on the other hand, is more complicated. There's a lot more that goes into muck, where they're not only tossing in stillage and lees, but they're also tossing in some of the agricultural waste at the distillery. So once you hear me describe the DUNDER samples that I'm going to look at under the microscope, it'll probably click that these are more like muck samples, because a lot more went into it than just stillage. So yeah, I just wanted to address that before the rest of the video. So a while back, I got an email from one of my viewers, James, and in the subject line, it said, "Do you still want DUNDER samples?" And I feel like this would only excite people like me. I was so thrilled to get this email. So James sent me some DUNDER samples. We're gonna look at one in particular, but around the same time, one of my Patreon members, Bill, he also said, "Hey, you want me to send you some samples of my DUNDER?" So we're gonna look at James and Bill's DUNDERs, and this isn't a spoiler. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, they are completely different from one another. And I think that's the really cool part of everyone having their own DUNDER bucket, little live DUNDER slash kind of DUNDER muck hybrid thing going on, is that this is completely unique to your own. So even if we zoom outside of home distillers, right? And we think about the DUNDER that's used to make rum in all these different distilleries, from, Hamden Estate that's been doing it for hundreds of years versus, let's say, Rouleaison in New Orleans that's been using DUNDER for only a handful of years. Their DUNDERs are going to be significantly different. And this isn't just about, climate, location, environment. This is also about what goes into treating, maintaining your DUNDER, or live DUNDER pit, right? Live DUNDER bucket. Everyone's got their own method. And I don't know that there's kind of like a right way or a wrong way to do it. And I think this leaves a whole bunch of room for your own artistic expression when you're making rums. So for instance, I got both samples, Bill and James's samples. And when I opened up Bill's, this smelled lovely, like a proper molasses fermentation. It was also very active. There was a little bit of pressure buildup inside the bottle, lots of CO2 being released. And so it smelled like, a nice little briny, molassesy, very carbonated thing. Yeah, it smelled delightful. Now when I opened James's, his is also slightly pressurized. There was still a lot of activity going on, but already looking at the samples, his had a lot more sediment, a little bit of like a layer forming on top, And as soon as I released a little bit of pressure inside the bottle, I was just flooded with notes of stinky, stinky, stinky Parmesan cheese. You can already see that once we zoom in under the microscope, that they're going to be very different because they already smell very different. And I want to give a lot of credit to our senses, right? We are able to detect all these different chemical compounds that are produced by microbes. And we have evolved to detect them because we have evolved to be able to detect when we should or should not put something in our mouths. This means if something smells bad, if something smells putrid, odds are there's some pathogens in there, and we have evolved to detect their scent, their signal, so that we don't continue to get sick and then die off as a species, right? We have evolved to say, no, that doesn't smell appealing. I don't think I'm going to put that in my mouth. Whereas if it smells good, that's a different story. Not saying that I would put either of these Dunders in my mouth. I don't think so. Just because, like, I don't need to. I'm fine with smelling them. Now, there are some things, like, I know that Parmesan cheese definitely doesn't smell good to everyone, or there's a lot of cheeses that don't smell good to everyone. But we have and kind of built that into our cultures, those smells, and learned those smells. And if it's part of our culture, if it's part of something that we eat regularly, we then develop kind of an acquired taste for it. So anyways, I didn't anticipate going on this little tangent, but let's take a look. We'll start with Bill's Dunder first. Actually, before we look at anything under the microscope, I do want to give a shout out to my Patreons. Thank you guys so much for helping to support the channel. I really, really appreciate you. You've already seen pictures of Bill's Dunder under the microscope, and as well as my Dunder under the microscope that has been aging for 1 whole year. I don't think I'm gonna include that in this video. But anyways, if you're if you're one of my Patreon members, you have seen pictures of what my Dunder looks like now and what it looks like under the microscope. But if you, the viewer, would also like to support the channel, please make sure to like, subscribe, comment, tell me about your Dunder. Please tell me about your Dunder in the comments below. And if you'd like to join us over on Patreon, I would be so, so, so thankful. Anyways, let's check out Bill's Dunder under the microscope first. And now I will say that Bill's Dunder is relatively new. It has a mixture of blackstrap molasses in it. He also added in some old bananas, some dried cane juice, apple cores, a little bit of his old Dunder that he had, and he also added in some commercial lactobacillus. Now, right away at 100 times magnification, you can already see that there's tons of yeast. At 100 times magnification, you're not able to really see the bacteria. They're just way too small, but the yeast are much bigger than bacteria. So if we zoom in to 400 times magnification, you can see, yes, there are tons of yeast, but there's also tons of bacteria as well. We'll start with the yeast first. They mostly appear to be like circular and ovoid. Some also appear to be like this apiculate, like almost like a lemon shaped, but more so like only on one side, so more shaped like an egg. There's also some that are like highly ovoid, borderline elongated, but I wouldn't quite call them elongated. And then there seems to be some yeast that have these very large vacuoles, while others have what looks like several small vacuoles. So I'm wondering if those are potentially 2 different yeast species. For the most part, the yeast don't appear to be in their growth phase because I'm not seeing a ton with like tiny little buds on them. But I do see some that looks like they have the daughter cell still attached to the mother or parent cell. So they appear to be budding yeast to me. I have no idea what kind of cell that is in the top left corner, but it looks like a Mandalorian helmet. let's move on to the bacteria. For the most part, there's a ton of rod-shaped or bacilli, and a lot of them are forming these end-to-end chains, which is called streptobacilli. There might be some bacteria that are kind of this circular morphology, but primarily I'm seeing this rod-shaped bacteria, the bacilli. I'm also noticing a few kind of short chains of bacteria that are forming this like corkscrew shape. I believe this is called spirillum. Ooh, a bubble popped and all the microbes just whooshed. But yeah, you can see Bill's dunder has a lot of diversity in it, and it is very, very active, but I am seeing a lot of rod-shaped bacteria, probably lactobacillus, because he did inoculate this dunder with a commercial lactobacillus. But I'm interested to see actually if we can narrow down what type of yeast this is. And I'll touch on that after we look at James's dunder. So like I said, James's dunder smelled like Parmesan cheese, super, super stinky. Not in a bad way, I really like Parmesan cheese. But already this gets my gears turning and I'm thinking, ooh, is this like some butyric acid in here that's forming that? Or is it like propionic acid? Or is it some other kind of lactic acid combined with other aromas that's giving me, yeah, this kind of Parmesan cheese vibe? I don't know. Anyways, James's dunder, a little bit more complicated and has a lot more that has gone into it. So he took back set from an all molasses rum and he added sour cream, lees from tepache, homemade tepache, store-bought pineapple kombucha, some baked eggshells, and both mulberry and sycamore wood. Now this all molasses rum was fermented using all molasses as well as dunder that came from honey, molasses, a lot of other things, and also had some tepache added into that fermentation. By the way, James has done an amazing job documenting everything that went into his rums and his dunders over on the Home Distiller Forum, and I'll leave a link in the description to that thread if you guys are interested in reading it. Now, like I said, there were a lot of solids that I could see, you know, on a macroscopic scale, and you can see those still at 100 times magnification. Lots and lots of those clusters. When we zoom in, you can see lots of bacteria, lots and lots of bacteria, both rod and circular, so bacilli and cocci. Those clusters, I can now see them. They're not only macroscopic, they're also microscopic clusters. And I believe that these clusters are probably polysaccharides that are produced by the bacteria maybe. And several different bacteria that are commonly found in fermentation are associated with extracellular polysaccharide production, formation. Now, the rod-shaped bacteria that I'm observing are longer in length than, say, in Bill's dunder. It doesn't appear that any of them are linked end to end, but I do notice some palisades, which is when they link together kind of side by side. Okay, wow, here's a ton of bacteria. There are also some more ovoid yeast. The yeast appear to be budding, and the bacteria appear to be predominantly single or double cells rather than in chains, as I mentioned. I also noticed these elongated cells, which are either very small yeast cells or very large bacteria, such as Bacillus megaterium. And Bacillus megaterium can be found in honey and bee pollen, and seeing that the dunder that went into the molasses wash that then went into the back set that was the new dunder bucket, since there was honey in that, it's possible that this is Bacillus megaterium. And in comparison, Here's an actual yeast cell. I can tell based on its size that is elongated and end budding. Okay, here's a ton more bacteria again. And you can see more clusters of the ovoid yeast cells. The yeast have moderately sized vacuoles from what I can see. My best guess is that the yeast is primarily Brett. This is not only due to the morphology, which Brett species can have a variety of different cell shapes, but it's also due to the smell. Brett species can produce isovaleric acid, which is like a rancid cheese, can smell a little like vomit, but it's possible that this is what's causing the Parmesan smell, or perhaps it's produced by some bacteria. So if we refocus a little bit, we can kind of see more of the shapes of the bacteria. There's a lot of small bacilli as well as some cocci. So a lot of short little rod shaped as well as some little spherical circular shapes. And I think there's also some longer rod shapes. Like I said, I don't believe that those are chains of small bacillus together, bacilli. Okay, there's also either some very long chains of rod-shaped bacteria that I can't really differentiate between the cells, or it's some filamentous bacteria. Okay, look at how long that cell is. It's possible that this could be a filamentous bacteria. For example, Lactobacillus fructivorans or fructivorans is found in a lot of things, like including dairy. If there's sour cream in here, possibly it's coming from that. Yeah, like look at how big this filamentous bacteria cell is. That's huge. I've also noticed that there's a lot of modal bacilli, kind of those longer ones that are not these filamentous ones. And they appear to be propelled in like one single direction. So at one end of the cell. I don't know if this is propelled by one single flagellum. If this is the case, it's called a monotrichous cell, or perhaps it's a tuft of flagella at one end. And if that's the case, it's called a lophotrichous cell. Yeah, so these modal rod-shaped bacteria could be a number of different species. And here's some more of those clusters of, like I was guessing, polysaccharides. Okay, I hope you enjoyed looking at these Dunder samples under the microscope as much as I did. I'm not sure that's possible. But as I've said in previous videos, it's really, really, really hard to tell the genera and species of yeast and bacteria under the microscope just based on morphology. There's various other ways that you can kind of narrow it down. I don't have a lab in my house yet. One day I'll build up that microbiology lab. And we'll have all the capabilities of actually narrowing things down a little bit more. However, one thing I do have at my disposal is the use of agar. So I'll come out with a video. This will take a while for these to kind of incubate. I don't think that's the technical word. For these colonies to grow, and based on the macroscopic view of those colonies, hopefully I'll be able to further break down at least what genera I think of yeast and bacteria are in these samples. So I've done my best to kind of narrow down what I think the possible microbes are in these Dunder samples. If you have any better guesses, please let me know. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if anything was unclear at all, or if you want me to dive into anything in particular. I'm not going to pretend to be a microbiologist by any means. This is all kind of learning as I go, and it's been really fun. Yeah, I hope you enjoy videos like these because I really enjoy looking at stuff under the microscope. But I also do other videos where I taste various types of spirits. Right now I'm on a big rum kick. I also post videos about experiments that I'm working on with recipes and things like that. And I try to do a lot of educational content, which I would kind of put this in the educational content arena. But ultimately, my goal with this channel is to hopefully inspire some curiosity within you towards spirits, fermented beverages, other fermented foods, mostly spirits. That's kind of my thing. Hopefully we accomplished that today.